Okay, so now we're going to go through the process of the key features that you need to be aware of when being part of the accountants program. And most of the things I'm going to cover today is what's going to be asked in the assessment. So these key points that you have to be aware of when using the application, especially when you are an accountant, because there's features in here that the end user will not have on their side. So I'm just going to quickly log in, and when you're part of the accountants program and you have the accountants edition, the first screen that will appear on your side by default will be the accountants dashboard. So this is unique to you as the accountant. So an end user will not have the accountants dashboard screen. So you'll notice this only applies to you as the accountant and it's unique to you. Same applies to your tasks. My tasks is specifically for uniquely available for you as the accountant, and an end user will not have this functionality. Another key point I just want to highlight before I proceed, you'll see here at the top, basically all your menus are listed here at the top depending on what functionality it is that you want to use. So anytime you need to navigate, the key features are here at the top. Now, another key or unique feature that's available to you only as an accountant, you'll see here would be fall under the menu of the accountants area, which is the stakeholders area. So here on the stakeholders area is unique also to you as an accountant, and an end user profile will not have this menu. Now, I'm going to be leaping between the different menus here at the top. So I'm going to start off on administration, because you'll see that administration is quite a key and vital part of your profile in terms of access of who can see what and what each individual person can and cannot do on the application. So now if you go into administration and you go to manage users, now, these managed users, you need to be aware that these users are not the users that you get for free. Those are Accountants Edition users, and those users are uniquely for your internal clerks and partners only. So this is not the email addresses that you'll be entering in here for your clients. And this specific field, when you're adding a user, will have a charge of 55 Rand, if I'm not mistaken, per user. But I'll touch on the pricing at a later stage of this session, just to give you a guideline of what the additional costs would be should you decide to add additional users. But bear in mind that these users are uniquely just for your clients, and the Accountants Edition users are not part of this. So you cannot add your clerks or partners under here. I'll show you on the next step where to go for that. So if you go under administration once more and you go to Accountants Edition users, this is, as I mentioned on the presentation earlier on, this is where you can add all your internal clerks and partners only, and there is no limit as to how many of these you can add. So there's no limit on Accountants Edition users. It's completely unlimited and it's free because you are part of the accountants program. Now, I'm going to take you through the steps on how to add an Accountant Edition user. So on this green blue button here on the left, you'll click on Add Accountant Edition User, and then you would enter in a name of a specific person. So just for testing purposes, I'm going to call this person, let me not call him Test, let me rather just call him Timmy. And then a last name, you can just put there Bartman, and you can put in an email address of that specific clerk that you would have. Then you'll see here at the bottom, you can specify the permissions that the Accountants Edition user should have. Now, you'll see if you hover your mouse over the first one, it'll kind of give you an idea of the amount of permissions that you can grant this person. So an Accountant Edition admin user has additional responsibilities assigned by the accountant's profile owner. So if you're the profile owner, you can then assign what permissions the person can have. So you can read through that when you create it if you're unsure of what this permission does. But essentially, when you select this option, it gives them access to whichever company you will assign to them. And then on here, it can also give them access to add, delete, or even edit other accountants edition users. So if, for example, you want Timmy, which is either your partner or one of your clerks, to have enough access to add additional clerks or additional partners or edit their information or maybe even delete them, you would also tick the second option. And then on the third one, if you want your accountant edition user, for example, your clerk or your partner, to also have access to assign clients to either themselves or to one of the other clerks, you would tick this option as well. So once you are satisfied with the permissions you've set, you click on save, and then it'll create a profile like this. So I have a test account that I've already created here. And as you can see, I created a Bill Brian, and I'm now going to show you how to assign clients. So once the account is created, you'll go to the far right to actions, and then you can then assign clients to Bill. Now on the left, you'll see there's a whole list of different companies that you would have under your profile. So if you have 20 or 10 companies and you want Bill just to have one of them, you would select that specific company and drag and drop it on the right. So as you can see here, I have already one that I've assigned to him, which is Cyclers. And if I want to limit the permissions even more within that company, you can click on permissions, and then in there, you can choose exactly what they can and cannot do. So as much as you can give them access to a company, if you want them to just be able to, for example, view reports, as you can see as an option here, you can select that option and untick absolutely everything else. So basically they will not have the option to perform any other tasks except view reports for that specific client that you've assigned to them. So this is all up to your discretion as to how you want to give or remove access, and then you can then from there decide what access they should have and shouldn't have, and then you can save that. Then once you've saved that, when they log in on their side, they'll be able to only see the clients that you have assigned to them. Now, the next step I want to touch on is your company. Now, on the menu of company, there's a section for company console. So as I mentioned earlier on when I was referring to the rebates, now on the company console, it'll list every single company that you have added on your side and that you have been invited to. So on the company console, as you can see, it lists all the companies that either you are an administrator to, that you have created, or that you have been invited to. You'll also notice that there is a to-do list that you have access to. So on here, you can see all your to-do lists and you can add tasks for yourself. And as you complete them, you can change the status to, for example, completed or overdue and so forth. And then you can also delete those tasks. Same applies now here on the next menu is access requests. Now on access requests, it can show you if, for example, someone has requested access to one of your companies, whether it's one of your clerks or maybe one of your partners. You can see that here, and then you can choose to either accept or deny the access that has been given to you. Now the next step I want to move over to is your company settings. So to change your company settings, you can go under company, change company settings. Now this is quite a vital part of your settings. Now as you can see here, I'm just logged into a different company that I have access to. So I'm going to just switch over back to the original company that I was on, so I can make a few changes to make it easier for you to see. So if you go back to company, change company settings. Now, on the company details, you can then enter in your company name, telephone number, your fax number, mobile number, contact information. And then on here on the right-hand side, you can choose to use your own email address, or if you want the system to use its internal system to send out emails, you can choose this. So this is a no reply email address. So whenever you send an email out here, it'll send out the email, but the client won't be able to reply on that email. So normally what we suggest is you tick the option to say use this email for communication, then you can put in your own email address in there, and then from there it'll send a communication to you. When a client gets the email, they'll show that it comes from your email address. And another great feature is you can also CC yourself. So if, for example, you choose not to use this option at the top and you used to use the mail service, you have an option to CC yourself. So each time you send out an email, you can see the CC information of every email that has been sent out from this specific company. The second option where you can add additional information would be the additional company information. So in here, you can input your company additional company information like your tax number, registered name, your entity type, as well as your tax practitioner details and SARS company information. So this is also an extra field that you can complete if you want to have more details, maybe when you're customizing your invoices for it to show. Now, the next step I want everyone to quite pay attention to would be your general settings. Now, under general settings, there is quite a number of features you can change, but the important ones that I need to cover for today's session, which will also touch on when you're writing your assessment. The first one is financial years. Now, on financial years, as you can see, it'll list all the financial years that you would have created. But if it's the first time you've created, or maybe there was a data conversion done, it'll list the years here. Now, the year-end function works a lot different compared to your Sage 50 desktop software. So on here, to do a year-end is extremely easy. The reporting and so forth is still the same, where you have to just cross-reference and make sure everything is correct. But in terms of rolling over, you would just click on one of these green buttons you see here on the far right, and then it'll add your next financial year. If you need to change the year, maybe you want an older year from what you're seeing here, let's say maybe you want to go even further back with your data information, you can actually click in to that financial start date and edit the date to any older date. And then automatically it'll change the following years to the next year. So for example, if you change this financial year to 2017, it'll be financial start 2017 to 2018, and then from here it'll be 2018, 2019, and so forth. So it'll automatically change. And then the key thing is when you're doing your year-end function, you've added that plus sign, you'll see here there's a tick box that says current financial year. So if you want people not to make a mistake and maybe process in the previous financial year, just make sure you tick then the option for the current financial year. Also, another great feature is the lockdown date. So if, for example, you've processed all these years and you're like, okay, you don't want anyone to process anything in the older dates, you can set down a lockdown date, which you can tick here, and then you can choose when to lock down, and anything on that date or prior, no transactions can be done there until you as the administrator come back here and you untick this option to allow further processing in that year. So if you want to make sure that no one makes any mistakes and tries to process in any of the older years, it's key that you tick set down lockdown date and you specify the date so that no one can make any mistakes and processing in the incorrect financial year. The next thing I wanted to just focus on is the regional settings. Now you'll notice on the regional settings here, these are the decimal places. So on your invoice, if for example you want it to be 100 Rand 0.00, you just have to make sure that you set it to 2 decimal places. So just make sure you set it to 2 decimal places. If you want more, you can change the figure to a 3 or a 4, but do bear in mind, if you choose a higher number, and you want to change it down to a lower number, just be very careful when making that change because it can affect how your invoices will look and your reporting will look. So by default, we just advise you to leave it on 2, but should you need more fields, you can change it, and it can also be customized. If you just wanted to apply, for example, to invoices, you can customize that on the layout designer. So on the layout design, you can just customize your invoices to have those additional decimal places. And you'll see that the date format here, you can also change or set to your preference. By default, it's day, month, year to make it easier because this is the same format that's going to be used when doing an import, for example, on your bank statements. Now, another key thing I want you to just focus on is the outstanding balances. Now, you'll see the aging can be set here, and it's key if you want your aging to show in a specific manner. Now, if you want your aging to show on days and not monthly, you would untick this option. So if you untick this option, when you view your aging, it'll be based on actual number of days and it will not be monthly, which is the 30 days, which is what it would represent when you choose monthly. And then you also have an option here to run aging based on either invoice date or due date. So if you choose due date, the aging will run based on the due date and not on the invoice date. Same applies with invoice date. It'll be vice versa to the due date. So just make sure when setting these settings, it corresponds with how you want your business to show when doing your reporting and when invoicing. Now, another thing, I just wanted to move on to the next stage. So you'll see here, when you're in your company settings, you have quite a number of additional windows here. So I'm going to go into the documents and statements section. We'll come back to VAT because VAT just has a few more extra things to cover. So when you're in documents and statements, let's say, for example, you have a company and there's already specific document numbering that you have been using and you want to continue using the document numbers, you can just go under here under document numbers, and then you can basically, essentially what you can do is you can change the document numbers to continue from a specific set of document numbers. So if you did not do any conversion, or if you did do a conversion and you want the numbers to continue with that same sequence, you can just come here and change this right here. Another great feature is your document description. So if, for example, you don't like the word quote and maybe you want to call performer invoice, or on sales order you want to call performer invoice, you can change the original name. Just also make sure that on the copy name you also make the change. Otherwise, when you, for example, send out your performer invoice and maybe the client didn't get it and you want to resend it, when it sends that copy again, it's going to have a different name. So make sure that you change both the original name as well as the copy name so that you don't make that mistake of having two different names, but it's the same document. Another great feature that Cloud Accounting has is email signatures. So you can create individual email signatures for each of your documents. So you can preview what the one is that by default the system has, or you can add your own signatures. So this is another great feature that you get when being part of the Cloud Accounting system. Another just quick thing I want to touch on is multi-currency. So as I mentioned earlier on, when you have that license that you get when being part of the accountant's program, you can set all the different currencies, and it's not just limited to the common currencies that you know, like for example, your pounds, your euros, or your dollars. There is quite an extensive list of currencies, as you can see here on this list. So there is quite a number of currencies. Basically, all the currencies you can think of are here. So you can set that so that when you're doing your processing, you have the option to create a pound, euro, or dollar account, whether it's for banking or when processing, for example, any of your invoices. So that's just another cool feature to look out for when you do choose to use the multi-currency. Now, going back to VAT settings, you'll see on VAT settings, you have the three different types of VAT types that you can use. It's either invoice-based, payment-based, or if your company does not process VAT, you can choose no VAT. At the bottom right, you'll see there's already the default VAT types that have been created by the system. But if there's an additional VAT type that you would wish to create, you can once again, similar like the financial years, you just click on the green plus sign and it'll basically generate a field for you to enter in your name of the VAT type, as well as for you to set the percentage. And if it's, for example, the most common or rather the default VAT type that you will be processing, you can tick the option to make it the default VAT type. So in this instance, obviously it is the standard rate. So we'll just leave that on the standard rate. And then I'm going to delete this specific one. So if maybe there's a VAT type that you don't, or maybe you created an error, you can delete it. But bear in mind, if you have created a VAT type, maybe you only used it once and you try and delete it, it will not delete because it's linked to a transaction. So the moment you create a VAT type and you're processing it at least once, it will unfortunately not delete because it's linked to a transaction. So the best thing you can do in that instance is just to rename that VAT type so it doesn't bother you when processing. Now you'll see here also on the far right, it's giving you a last VAT period end date, last VAT submission due date, and also your VAT frequency. Now these features, or rather these dates, are dates that SARS would provide for you. So once you get those dates from SARS, you can enter them in here, but rather I'm going to show you the wizard, which will make it a lot easier when setting it up. Same applies here. There's a little tick box here which offsets credits on sales or purchases. So if you don't want this, you can untick it, but ultimately by default it is enabled. Now going back to the VAT, I'm just going to quickly go so that you can see what I was referring to on the wizard. So if you go to reports and you go to VAT, if it's the first time you're setting up your VAT returns, as you saw on the other side, it was still blank on the dates. It's going to bring you this wizard here. You would just go next and you'd enter in your VAT number that SARS would have provided for you, and then your VAT period end date and submission due date will also be provided by SARS, as well as the reporting frequency. Now by default, or rather most cases, it's a 2-month frequency. So you just set those two up, set your frequency, and then when you click next, it'll take you to a page where it'll show that it's complete. So just for you to be able to see what I'm referring to, I'm just going to set it similar to this example that they've put here. So I'm going to put it on April 30th, and the submission due date, I'll set it to May the 25th. So it's going to show you this. It'll say, congratulations, you are done. It's going to show what settings you've just entered in there. And then when you're happy with everything, you can click finish. If maybe there's a mistake, you click back and you make your amendments. So I'm going to click finish here so you can see what it will look like. Now, you'll also notice when you're navigating on the system, if it's the first time you're under that menu or that specific feature, a little pop-up will appear, which will give you like a basic rundown of what you can pretty much do or what that section is for. But you can always close the window, or if you're still learning, you can just click next and read what functionality it can give you. Now, you'll see the dates that I've set on the wizard screen will show here, which will show you the previous VAT periods and submission due dates and what will be the next VAT period end date and submission due date. So as you can see, these features are what it would look like when you've created it. Another great feature is when you are the administrator, you have the option to reset your VAT period. So if you believe you've made a mistake, you have this option to do this, but I would advise when doing this, be sure that there hasn't been, for example, a lot of transactions in that company. So this is probably something that you would do right after setting up and you see, okay, something is not right. And then you have the option to start over, because this will affect how your reporting will look. You see, you'll also get a confirmation message as to, are you sure you want to do this and what the implications will be. So just be careful when doing this. Another important thing, what I would advise though, is if you are the administrator, I would rather advise you to limit who can start this over. So this would apply to the user permissions, which I mentioned earlier on. So just to quickly go back on that. So if you go to your administration and you go to your accountants edition users, and you go to one of your clerks or partners which you've assigned permissions to, and you go to permissions, that VAT settings, you'll see there's an option for VAT, and you scroll down, VAT reports and returns, and then this is the key feature: clear and reset of VAT periods to start again. Make sure that you untick this option if you do not want someone else to have access to be able to change the VAT periods, because it will affect your reporting if someone starts over and they're not even sure what they're doing. So that's just a key thing to remember should you decide to make that change and you don't want anyone else to be able to amend that change. So now the next thing I want to touch on is just to go back on your company settings is you can also set your branding. So now obviously the branding is not unique to your accountant's edition, but it's just something to be aware of. So you can change your company logo. You can choose where it should show on the top left or top right, or for there to be no logo. And then when you click on preview, it will show you what it will look like. And as you can see here, you also have options for your logo to show in the customer zone or for it not to show for your clients. So if you just wanted to show on invoices and statements, you'd select that options. And if you want to also show in the customer zone, you enable that tick box as well. Now, the next thing I want to touch on is budgets. Now, to access your budgets, you'll go under company, budgets, and then you'll go to add a budget. Now, with budgets, you only have an option to add a budget for this year or for next year. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a test budget. Let's just call it test. And then you have an option to create a budget based on historic data, and you have an option to create your budget manually. So now I don't currently have any historic data in this company, so I'm going to choose the option to create a budget manually. But you'll notice when either one of these that you choose, it'll take you to a wizard screen when you're creating based on historic. So I'm just going to show you a quick look of what that looks like. Let me just create a unique name. I think I have already created a test. So I'll just call this on test 1. Now, when you click next, it'll give you a wizard. And on this wizard, you can then choose, you want to choose historic data to use from last year or this year. And you can also choose to adjust your values to either increase or decrease by a specific percentage, or to be rounded to the nearest whichever value that you want, whether it's 1, 10, 100, or 1,000. Or you can use this year's actuals and round it to the nearest specific value, similar like on the first one where it's ones, tens, hundreds, or 1,000. And then you can create your budget. Now I'm going to go one step back again. When you choose just to create your budget manually and you click on create budget, it's going to show you the following screen. Now on this screen is what you would see after you've created. If you chose the historic option, this is the option that will show you after you've chosen the page where I was on just now. Now you'll see this is all the fields that you can fill in based on the accounts that are created on your system. So I just have the default accounts. So these are all the default accounts that you do get on the system. If you have any additional ones that you would have created yourself, they will also list here. Now you'll see when you click in one of the blocks, you'll see two little arrows that appear here. So what these arrows do is you'll see if you, for example, say 500 and you hover your mouse over the blue arrow, it says it'll copy budgets values for all your accounts. So if you click on this blue icon, it'll bring up a window for you where you can copy the values across to each month going forward, or you can copy each month going forward and adjusting the values at the same time. So if you just want it to be the 500 across the board, you'll click on copy now, and it's going to put that 500 across all of those accounts up until that end of that financial year. If you, for example, choose, let me just take this out. If, for example, you choose to select the yellow icon and you want to copy the values but adjust and round it off, you have that option as well. So here you can copy the value across each month going forward and adjust the volume each time. So you can increase or decrease, and you can do it once off or every 2 months or every month, every quarter, or every 6 months. So if you want, for example, it to increase by, let's say, 5%, you'd select the 5% and you can round it off still to the nearest 1 rand. And when you copy that across, as you'll see, it'll update all the accounts going forward. But obviously, because it's 1 rand, everything else is going to be a 525. But if you don't want that to be, or you want it to be a higher value, you can then just change it, maybe round off to the nearest 100, and maybe the percentage, make it, for example, a 10%. You can do it once off and then copy, and then it'll update everything across as you would have chosen it to be. So those are the two options. So instead of you entering everything one by one, you can just choose a specific amount, choose the option to copy budget values, and copy this value across each month going forward. or by increasing or adjusting the value as you are copying across the values for that account. So this will all depend on how you want to do the change. So the blue is to copy budget values for all accounts, and then the yellow is to copy budget values for that specific account, and you can choose how you want it to increase or decrease. Now, the next thing I want to touch on is your under accountants area. Now, on the accountants area, you'll see there's quite a number of options, and one of them that is pretty unique to the accountants edition, and also what you can get on the end user is, as you can see on accounts here, if you just look here while we're on the budgets, you'll notice that the accounts just have names. There's no codes. But if you want to be able to export your report with account numbers, maybe someone specific wants your report to have account numbers, you have that option. So if you go on the accountants area and you go to trial balance export, another thing I just want to mention while this message pops up, every time you make a change on the system and you have not saved it, it will give you a message to say, are you leaving the site? Changes have not been saved that you haven't saved. So you have an option to leave. So if maybe there's something you still want to save before you move, make sure you save it first before you leave. So obviously in this case, because we're just testing, we're going to leave. We're not saving any of this information. Now, when you leave and you go to your trial balance export, you'll see it'll give you the format to export in CSV. And if you still have the Sage Pastel Auditor, which I doubt there's any of you that still have that, which is still an old system, you have that option to export in a format that will be supporting the Sage Pastel Auditor. You then choose your date range that you want to export, and you'll show either closing balances or movements. And another great feature which I've mentioned is then assigning account numbers. Now when you click on assign account numbers, it's going to list all the accounts that you currently have, and then you can then specify what those account numbers are that you want to show when exporting. So just be aware of that, that you do have that feature, so you can export the trial balance using account numbers. Now, another feature I want to touch on is analysis codes. Now, analysis codes can be got, you can get under a company analysis codes. Now, what analysis codes is, it's pretty much similar to having like project codes. Now, you can have a maximum of 3 analysis codes. So, for example, this one can be Johannesburg, Durban, Cape Town, but you have unlimited amount of categories. So, with the 3 analysis codes that you choose, under each one, you can have unlimited categories. So, I would advise whenever you're using these 3, just choose a more broader analysis code, and then for each one you can then specify in detail what falls under that specific category. So if maybe you want under analysis code 1, like I mentioned, Johannesburg, you can have Johannesburg, and then for the category you can have all your different specific cities or specific sections within Gauteng or Johannesburg. So you can just specify that Joburg, Cape Town, Durban, and then have those individual categories because those are unlimited. And also another great feature with the analysis codes is that you can use it for reporting. So when you've created all these codes and their categories, when you're processing, you have the option to choose those analysis codes so that we know that when you're processing, for example, an invoice for this specific company, you use this specific analysis code. When you pull your reports, you can see exactly, you can filter your reports to say, okay, when I was doing processing for this specific region, maybe like I said, Gauteng, and you wanted to, on a specific category, let's say the category was mouse, like computer mouse, you would select that filter, which is that category, and then when you view the report, it'll list all the transactions that were done for that specific region, for that specific category. So that's another great feature of using the analysis codes. It just basically gives you more detailed reporting if you do process using those analysis codes. Now, another great feature that we have is when you go under company, you have an option to import data and export data. Now, this import and export data is only master files. So this does not apply to transactions. So this is not importing, for example, invoices and so forth. This is specifically for your master files. So if you have customers that you've created in your QuickBooks or Xero or any other accounting system that you're coming from, and you don't want to go through the hassle of going and creating them one by one, you can export it from the system that you were using and then come here and then specify whether it's a customer or a supplier or an item, and then choose your date range, see similar to what you've set on your company settings, and make sure it matches from the software that you exporting from. And then you can choose your file, and then you can import those customers or items or suppliers. So that cuts out a lot or a big chunk of your time having to worry about importing and exporting. Now, same applies when you want to export data. So if you have your information in the system and you want all your customers, maybe you want to move certain customers, or maybe someone wants like a full breakdown of all your customers or your suppliers or your items, you have that option to also export all of those specific master files. The next thing I want you to touch on is journal processing. So journal processing, you would access under accountants area, process journal entries. Now on journal entries, you'll see it looks slightly different than your Sage 50C, for example. You'll see on this side, it'll have your date, effect, account, reference, description, VAT type, amount. Then on the far right, there's an option that says by affecting account. So one thing you must always bear in mind when processing your journal entries, the account that you have here on the left will also always be the inclusive account. So on the left, it'll also always be the inclusive amount, and then the by affecting account will always be the exclusive amount. So just bear that in mind. The left is always inclusive, right is always exclusive. Another great feature with journal processing, so this is one of the things that you can import in terms of transactions, is journal entries. So you can import journal entries if maybe you've captured your journal entries somewhere else and you don't want to go through the trouble of recapturing that on the system that you're on. You have the option to import those specific journal entries. So how the file type looks like, you have an option here. If you click how do I set up the file, it's going to give you all the fields that are required to show on your Excel document so that you know which fields to focus on. And if for whatever reason this is a bit too tedious for you, there's that great function right there where you can download an example. So when you click on that download example, it'll download a CSV file and it'll put everything already in the columns for you to show you exactly what the format will be or what it should look like. So it'll look like this. All these headings that you see here in the columns, it'll all be put in perfect columns for you when downloading the example. So another great feature on journals is that if you know that every month or every specific date range you have to capture exactly the same journal, there is the option to add reoccurring journals. Now on reoccurring journals, it gives you the option to create a name for that reoccurring journal. You can set up that journal, you can delete it or edit it, and then you can also schedule. So you can schedule whether it's once only, daily, weekly, monthly, or yearly. And you can specify when it should start, whether it should have an end date, or whether it should stop after a specific amount of occurrences. So this is a very great feature that you can use to navigate and set up your recurring journals so that you don't have to each time go back and do a specific journal over and over again when you can just set them up to automatically process that. Now, the next thing I want to focus on is your banking. So if you go to banking, transactions, banking. So once you've created your bank account, you can choose it to be set as default. If it's set as default, it'll automatically list here and it will automatically select. If you did not set it as default, it will sit on none. So the moment you open banking, everything is going to be grayed out. As you can see, you won't be able to process anything. Then you still have to manually choose a specific bank account. So if you have multiple bank accounts and there's this one that you know you always, or let me rather say mostly processing, you can set it as a default. But if you're scared of making a mistake in processing the wrong bank account, do not set a default. And automatically when you choose banking for transacting, it will throw it on the gray screen and you just have to specify out of your list of bank accounts which specific account it is that you would like to process to. Similar to journal entries, you also have the option to import the transactions for banking. So here you can import your bank statements. The import file types that you can choose is OFX, CSV, Standard Bank CSV. If you have a net cash account, it can also import that. And then this last option here, which says historic CSV, is specifically if you have processed within the accounting system and then you export it and you want to re-import that information, then you would choose that option for historic CSV. Another great, so basically to export, as you can see here, there's the export button. So you can export if you have transactions in here that you want to export and maybe you want to re-import later, or maybe you want to delete some transactions, but you don't want to go through the trouble of recapturing specific things. You can export, make or delete in bulk, come back and re-import, but then choosing the historic CSV function. Another great functionality here with the banking in terms of the import is on the far right, you'll see there's a little feature here where you can actually specify a date range. So let's say, for example, you have a whole month's worth of bank statement transactions and you only want a specific week imported because all the others already on the system. You can specify the dates to import and then just filter to those specific dates and it'll only import that specific section. So it won't import the whole month when actually you just want the first week of that specific file. So instead of you going into Excel or an OFX file and trying to edit and figure out where is the first month sitting, you can actually just filter it down and choose your import date. Another feature I just want to touch on is mapping rules. Now with mapping rules, let's say for example you have a transaction in here. So I'm just going to create a random transaction called account, selection, let's say it's other sales, just create a reference here saying greatness, and received, let's say you received 5,000. Now if this is a common transaction that you get, let's say, for example, it's something like bank charges. So let me rather do it like that. Let me change this to bank charges and let's say Discovery Bank, oops, charges, and it's money spent. So let's say the bank charges is, let's say it's 20 Rand. Now, every time, if you know this is a common transaction that you get when, for example, importing your bank statements or when setting up bank feeds. So that's another great feature that does come with the system. I'll touch on that after explaining this. So if you have a common transaction that always comes in no matter what, let's say whether it's weekly or daily or monthly, where you don't want to each time be a tedious process where you have to manually always process that exact same transaction, or rather allocate it. You have the option here on the far right where you can create mapping rules. So when you click that little icon here with the like 3 stacked lines, you have the option for it to always automatically find those specific transactions and you can choose how you want it to map. So basically it'll allocate it to a specific account. When you're happy with the change that you've set, you can save this and it will then create for going forward that specific rule. If that rule maybe doesn't apply or maybe you created it incorrectly and you want to edit, you can just go back to banking and then you can go to lists and then you can go to bank statement mapping rules. So because I don't want to save anything for now, I'm just going to say okay. And then on here, the bank statement rules, basically what it'll do is it'll check for your duplicates. You can then choose what it is that you want to check. If you don't want it to check duplicates, you can say do not check. But I believe it does come in handy when a system picks up that there's already duplicates on the system, and then you can choose where it must check duplicates. Is it on your reviewed transactions or on your new and reviewed? So preferably it'll be the new and reviewed. So anything new coming in, it'll first check, hey, does this transaction exist? Is it a copy, yes or no? And then you can choose if you want to import it or not. So as I mentioned earlier on, when you're on banking, after creating your mapping rule, if there's anything that you've done that's incorrect, all of the mapping rules that you create will list here. So right now I don't currently have anything, so that's why there's nothing here, but there'll be a long list of all the transactions or the list of mapping rules that you have created. So if you made a mistake, you just go here on the far right, you can delete it, or you can come in here on each of those lines that you want to edit, click in there, make your change that you want, and then save that change that you would have made. So like I mentioned earlier on banking, when capturing, instead of just doing manual imports, you also have an option to do automatic bank feeds. So if you go into banking transactions, manage bank feeds, when you're there, you can then set up automatic bank feeds. So you can choose Sage bank feeds or Netcash. So Sage bank feeds would link to your respective bank account. You'll just accept the terms and then you'll continue. And then it should list the bank that you use. By default, it'll list the most common banks here, which is these 5. If there's a specific bank you want, maybe like, for example, Investec. Oh, sorry. You'll just type it out and it'll list here. And then you can select your bank account, fill in your login details, and then just authorize it on your app or on your online banking so that every time you log into the system, you can choose to either automatically refresh or you can choose to manually refresh, and then it'll automatically bring in those transactions, which will save you a ton of time instead of you capturing every transaction manually, or the time it'll take you to log on to your online banking, download the statement, come this side, and then try and re-import it into the system. So that's a few steps that you completely cut out. It's literally you log in every morning or afternoon or whenever you're working onto the system, and the transactions would have automatically start populating into your bank. So when you go under your banking transactions banking, they'll start listing there automatically without you having to still do a whole import. So another feature I just want to touch on is your reporting. Now, if you go under reports and you go to your financial statements, it's going to give you the 3 key financial statement reports. So the one I want to just focus on is the profit and loss. Now, this report is key in terms of how you want your profit and loss report to show. So you have an option for the different date ranges of how far back you want to report on. And if you wanted to group maybe by monthly, or like I mentioned earlier on with regards to the analysis code. So if you wanted to show you in more detail based on your analysis codes, you have the option to select that. Now, depending on which feature you choose, you'll notice that some of the functionalities get grayed out and some become available. So depending on what you choose, let's say, for example, I choose all, you'll see everything else gets grayed out and it's only that specific one that becomes available and that one. But if you choose, for example, yearly, now more features are available. Or if you choose monthly, certain features get grayed out and certain become available. So it all depends on which date range you choose, or if you want to choose custom dates, you can specify your date range, but it'll depend on what features become available, depending on what filter it is that you are choosing. So just make sure when choosing your filters that you make sure that it doesn't affect the one that you are looking for. Now, another key thing I want us to touch on is accounting groups. So obviously, because there's no account numbers on cloud accounting and it's just a named convention, and you want to maybe group your accounts to show in a specific way, you can do that by going to accounts, account reporting groups. Now on here, you'll see all the accounts that you currently have will be listed here in all of these subcategories. So if, for example, under expenses, you want to group, for example, electricity, entertainment, and insurance, you would select all those specific accounts. Then you'll see a button here at the top becomes available. It says group accounts. So you can group those accounts. give it a name and say, let's just call it entertainment. And then you click on save. So because obviously entertainment is already there, so I'll need to probably specify a specific name. So let's just call it tragic. And you click on save, it's going to create that subcategory group. So you see under tragic, you know, electricity, water, entertainment, and insurance all falls under tragic. If you're not happy with the naming, you can edit it. If you're not happy with the grouping, maybe someone specifically doesn't want the reporting to show in a specific way, you have the option to delete or edit that. So once you delete it, it goes back to its default way it was showing. So there's a lot of customization that you can do there in terms of your accounting groups. Now, another great feature that is on the system is you'll notice that if maybe someone has made a change on an account and you're trying to figure out, okay, who processed something specifically on the system, and let's say all your clerks or your partners are denying and saying, no, I didn't do it, you can go under your accountant's area, go under reports, and then there's audit reports. So now on here, it gives you a breakdown. So you can choose to see who did the opening balances or if there's anyone that did any VAT adjustments. There's an audit trail report in terms of what changes were made on the system. There's system audit trail reports. There's also a great accountants audit trail report. So for all the accountants, whatever changes they make, like your clerks, you can see exactly who did what, and as well as your user listing. So that's just the key thing to also look out for when trying to audit anything in terms of who did what on the system. Another feature I just want to touch on is items. Now on items, you'll find that a lot of times you want to do like a stock take and you are limited to, for example, you want to do a stock take on your system and you're limited to how you want it to average out. So let's say, for example, you choose quantity on hand or on average cost. Now, if you do this wizard and you go next, it's going to give you a bit of a long process. So when you click the drop down, whatever items you have now, in this case, obviously, because it's a test account, I only have 2 items. But now imagine you have 2,000 items. You're not going to want to go to each one like this one by one. So a great feature that was added is the quick entry grid. So instead of choosing the first option, you would choose the second option. You'd go next, and then it's going to give you a grid of your items. Now, as you see, there's currently nothing there. So you just click on load all. It'll list your different items that you have. Right now, it's only the 2 tests which I've mentioned. And then you can then easily change the new average cost or the quantity on hand that you have. So this just makes your item or stock take that much easier because everything is on one screen. You can edit everything in one go and then save. If perhaps you want to update your stock in hand and you have it, maybe someone else works on the stock on hand, maybe on Excel, they can gladly continue doing it on Excel. And then when on your side, you just come here and then you have the option to import. So you'll have the option to import the file and then it'll update all your quantities and then you can save. Again, similar like all the other import options, when you click how do I set this up, it's going to give you the 3 important things. It'll give you the code of the item, the average cost, as well as the quantity on hand. And then again, if you don't want to do this manually, you can just download an example, edit that example, open it up on your side, and then you can paste basically your items based on the layout of the format that's been given by the system. Now, another key thing I just want to touch on is your regional settings. So you'll notice where there's a lot of importing and exporting, your regional settings have to be in a specific setting on your actual system itself. So as much as the regional settings under the company settings where I showed you where it shows a day, month, year, your control panel details have to be correct as well. So I'm just going to quickly switch to that so that I can just show you. Now, when you're on your control panel and you go to your regional settings, so if you click on region, it's going to give you the different settings that you can choose. Now, by default, we would suggest you set English United Kingdom or you can set English South Africa. But the key thing is under your additional settings. Your decimal symbol preferably should be on full stop, and your digit grouping symbol should be on comma. Your list separator should also be on comma. If you chose English United Kingdom, just make sure under the currency you just change it to an R for South African Rand. Make sure the decimal symbol is also a full stop here, as well as the digit grouping symbol is a comma. This will just ensure that whenever you're trying to import any of your information, it does not affect your layout, because if the format is incorrect, your format will show incorrectly and your tables will be all messed up. So this is just to ensure that when you're downloading any imports or trying to import anything, everything is in individualized columns and it's not all jumbled up or separated by a comma delimited. Now, the next thing I just want to touch on is your customer accounts. So as I mentioned under company settings, the aging where I mentioned you can view it or rather save it aging based on monthly or by daily or invoice date or due date. Just to set that on your customers. So if you go to your customers and you go to your list of customers, so I just have a test account here. I'll open up one of these accounts. So you'll see here in the bottom right, you'll have an option here where you can set a due date for payment. So you can choose a due date payment for either 7 days or more days. And then here on this drop down, it'll give you 5 other options. So you can choose days from date of invoice, day of the current month, day of the following month, end of the current month, days from the end of the invoice month. So you can choose which will work for your business, but by default it'll set it to days from date of invoice, but you can choose how you want this to be. And then your VAT type, if maybe this specific account uses a different VAT type, you can set the default here as well. And you can set up an email address which will link up to that account. So whenever you send out your statements automatically, because you've saved the email address in there, it'll then focus on that specific email address to send out whenever you create an invoice or a sales order or perform an invoice or a quote for that specific client. So just bear in mind that this is also something that's key, and I believe it is also part of the assessment. So just bear in mind that the due date for payment is a key question that will be asked in the assessment. Now, I think I have covered majority of the key things that you should know, but there's another one that I just need to focus on is your notes. So you can go to company, and then company notes and attachments. So you can send different notes and attachments on the system, depending on what it is that you want. If you want maybe a specific note on either financial report or you want to attach something, you can do it here on this page. Another great feature that's unique to the Accountants Edition. So if you go to your company and you go to Company Console, and let's say, for example, let's open up one of these other companies. So I'm not logging in on the company. I just want to add a specific note for that company. So if you click in between the company name and the tasks, there's an option for notes. So now on here, you can add a note for your accountant. So if, for example, it's a clerk or a partner or even your customer, they can add a note here and say, hey, look, I'm struggling with, for example, the journal entries. Can you just double check for me to make sure that I captured everything correctly? So this is also unique to you being part of the Accountants Edition. So you can create a note in there, and then you can specify to say this and this and this and this, and it's due by this day, so that the accountant, when they log in, they'll get a notification. So I'm just going to quickly show you here. They'll get an alert like this. So it'll show like this, but obviously under the notes. So if there's a note created under the note, it's going to say, for example, 4 or 5 notes, and it's also going to show in red to be like, okay, to grab your attention so that you are aware. So you as the account, when you log in, you can see, okay, there's a note or an alert for me. So when someone creates a note for you, you'll be able to see it on your side. Same applies here. So if there's any alerts or reviews, for example, in this instance, in this company, there's some transactions that are not allocated. So it'll give you a red alert to tell you that, look, your VAT submissions are overdue. So that's something that's important. Your dollar account and your import testing bank account and your petty cash account and your test account has unallocated transactions and transactions that needs reviewing. So you'll always see these key features that will highlight to you to be alert on the system specifically to you as the accountant. So this is not a feature that they will see as an end user. This is specific to you as the accountant. And then in terms of deleting a company, if you go to company details on the far right, the delete would show here. So I know a lot of times when you log in and you go to company console, you would think the delete button is somewhere here, and that's not the case. So it's very important that you'd have to click here on the between the name and the tasks for it to bring up this pop-up window. Go to company details, and then it'll give you an option here to delete your company. Another great feature, if for example you are taking over a set of books for someone, or someone is taking over your set of books or a specific company, you have the option here on the far right where you can transfer ownership. So if you click on transfer ownership, it'll bring up this nice little window here where you would enter in the new administrator who's going to be receiving the company. So if, for example, you're taking over your client's books and you want to have control over them rather than them having full control over them, they would log in on their side. They'd go to transfer ownership. They'd put in your email address or your practice email address, the reason for the company transfer, and then you'd have to tick all these options, and then you can send a request. Now, when you send the request, they'll get if they are sending it to you, you will get an email notification to say, so and so has sent you a company. And then when you click on that link, it'll then allow you to accept or decline that company that's being sent to you. So it'll give you, the moment you log in on your accountant's dashboard, there'll be a message to show that, hey, look, there's a new company waiting to be accepted by you. And then you have the option then to accept or deny that company. So just one thing I also just want to touch back on under the login page. So the moment you log in, you'll see there's also a new functionality here where if ever there's any alerts or reports, you would be able to see it here. So in this instance, it's auto entry. So auto entry is a great integration to the company that can help you reduce the time it takes you to capture your invoices, receipts, or bank statements. So when you have a chance, also do have a look at that, because you do get a free trial to try it out to see if it'll work for your business. So yeah, auto entry is fully integrated to Business Cloud Accounting, and it's a great feature that you can use being part of the Accountants Edition. Now, earlier on, I mentioned the pricing structures. So I'm just going to go under administration, and then I'm going to go to my profile. Now, when you're on my profile, it's going to show what you're currently being billed for with all your information and all your licenses. Now, if you click on upgrade, it's going to show you basically the pricing structures. Now, as you can see, when you're part of the accountants program or in the accountants edition, your companies cost $2.95 per company per month. If you add an additional user, which is, remember, this is not the accountants edition users. This is specifically your users where it's your client that you're inviting to the profile. So that's the 55 Rand per month. But if you don't want to invite your client, there's no need to purchase this additional license. And then your document storage. So if you like updating or uploading rather your receipts or specific attachments, which I mentioned earlier on under the other settings where you can attach specific files to specific reports or documents, that would cost you an additional 14 Rand per additional gigabyte. But by default, you do get 1 gigabytes of storage. As you can see here at the top, by default, you get 1 gigs. But the moment you need more, it'll cost you 14 Rand for every additional 1 gigabyte. And then these two licenses you do get for free, which is your time tracking, which is 120 Rand, as well as your multi-currency, which is also 120 Rand. So essentially you're saving 240 Rand on those two licenses already automatically by being part of the accountants program. So the moment you complete your certification today, you will qualify for that free time tracker and multi-currency license. And then if you want advanced inventory, where basically what that means is an integrated inventory system where if you're processing something in a specific province, or you wanted to automatically update your inventory stock levels, that would fall under the advanced inventory module. And then there's also the debtors manager, where you can manage all your different accounts to manage their debts. So those are basically the pricings that go with being part of the accountants edition or accountants program. But remember, when you have 10 or more clients, that's where you, or five or more, sorry, if you have five or more companies, you also qualify to fall under the bureau pricing. Now, the bureau pricing is structured slightly different. So the base company will still be 295, but you also get two or three different types. So on type one, that would be your full accounting, where you would be processing your full accounting, and you have all the functionalities as you would per normal when processing on your accounting system. But then there is also what we call the type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4 companies. Now, what that means is a type 2 and a type 3 company is specifically for ledger processing, customer and supplier journals, banking, but it does not include customer or supplier documents. So this will only apply to someone that doesn't process any invoices or supplier invoices, quotes, or sales orders. Then that type 2 and type 3 is a mere 50 Rand per company. So instead of paying the full 295, but you're only processing your banking or your journals, you can now change the type to type 2 and 3, which will be 50 Rand. But you only qualify for that if you have five or more companies on your profile. And more details can be requested on that, which I can share with you so that you just see if you do qualify to be part of that, because it is also region specific. So we can unfortunately not have that feature in, for example, higher up, maybe for example, West Africa or in Europe and so forth. So it's specifically unique to South Africa. And then there's a type 4, which would basically mean if maybe, for example, your client just required you to process in January, but for the rest of the year, there's no processing that needs to be done, you can change that type to type 4, and then there won't be any processing involved there, meaning there won't be any price attached to that. So that is also uniquely available if you have five or more companies and you're part of the bureau pricing, which is something that you will not get if you are not certified and if you're on end user profile. So that's why I definitely encourage you to do get certified the moment we're done with the session, so that it will help you to be able to get all these great features that you would get where you wouldn't get it normally if you were on a normal just accounting or accountant's edition but not certified. So it is key and imperative that you do get certified to unlock all these great benefits. Like I mentioned, your multi-currency module, time tracker module, your unlimited accountants edition users, and your free base company. And when you complete your certification today, you also get that additional 12-month free company that you won't have to pay for. So it can either be also form part of one of your practice set of books, or you can assign it to one of your clients. So you know one of your clients for the next 12 months, you won't have to pay the subscription on there, provided that you complete the certification today on the application. So just bear in mind that those are the key things that you would get when being part of the program.